I never thought Halloween would be the night that changed my life forever. But as I stood there, staring at the small, disheveled figure on my doorstep for the 5th time that evening, I knew something was terribly wrong. It started like any other Halloween. I'd spent the afternoon carving pumpkins and hanging fake cobwebs around my front porch. As the sun began to set, I filled a large bowl with an assortment of candy bars and settled into my favorite armchair near the front door, ready for the onslaught of trick-or-treaters. The first hour was busy, with groups of excited children ringing my doorbell every few minutes. I smiled at their costumes, complimented their makeup, and dropped handfuls of sweets into their outstretched bags. It was around 8 p.m. when things started to slow down, and that's when I first saw him. The doorbell rang, and I opened the door to find a small boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, standing alone on my porch. He wore a simple ghost costume, just a white sheet draped over his head with 2 eye holes cut out. In his hands, he held a plastic jack-o'-lantern bucket. "Trick or treat," he said softly, his voice muffled by the sheet. I dropped a few candy bars into his bucket. "There you go, little ghost. Happy Halloween." He nodded silently and turned to leave. I watched him walk down my driveway and disappear into the darkness of the street. Something about the encounter left me feeling uneasy, but I brushed it off and returned to my chair. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. To my surprise, it was the same little ghost. His costume looked slightly rumpled, as if he'd been running. "Back again?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "You must really like this house." He said nothing, just held out his bucket. I noticed it was empty, as if he hadn't visited any other houses since his last stop at mine. Frowning slightly, I added more candy to his bucket. "Where are your parents, buddy?" I asked, peering past him into the night. The street was empty. He shrugged and turned away, disappearing once more into the darkness. Now thoroughly puzzled, I stood at the door for a few minutes, watching for any sign of an adult accompanying the boy. But there was nothing. No concerned parent calling out, no older sibling keeping watch from the sidewalk. Just the quiet rustle of leaves and the cool October breeze. I tried to focus on the other trick-or-treaters who came to my door, but my mind kept wandering back to the little ghost. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was bothering me. Another half hour passed before my doorbell rang again. My heart sank as I opened the door to find the ghost standing there once more. This time, his sheet was noticeably dirty, with smudges of what looked like mud around the bottom edge. One of the eye holes was slightly torn, revealing a glimpse of pale skin underneath. "Hey there," I said gently, crouching down to his level. "Are you okay? Do you need help finding your way home?" He shook his head slowly, the sheets swaying with the movement. Again, he held out his empty bucket. I hesitated before adding more candy. "Listen, I'm getting worried about you. Can you tell me your name? Or where your parents are?" The boy remained silent. After a moment, he turned and walked away, his movements seeming more sluggish than before. This time, I stepped out onto my porch and watched him go. He walked to the end of my driveway, then turned left and continued down the sidewalk. But instead of approaching another house, he simply vanished into the shadows between 2 streetlights. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I went back inside and paced my living room, debating what to do. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them? That a child in a ghost costume kept coming to my house for candy? It sounded ridiculous, even to my own ears. I decided to wait. If he came back one more time, I'd insist on helping him find his way home, or I'd call the authorities. I couldn't shake the feeling that this child was in trouble, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do something to help. The minutes ticked by slowly. I found myself jumping at every sound, half expecting to hear the doorbell at any moment. But an hour passed with no sign of the little ghost. Just as I was starting to think, or hope, that it was over, there was a soft knock at the door. Not the doorbell this time, but a gentle tapping that I might not have heard if I hadn't been listening so intently. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever I might find on the other side. The door swung open, and my breath caught in my throat. The little ghost stood there, but his costume was in tatters. The once white sheet was now a dingy gray, torn and dragging on the ground. Both eye holes were ripped wider, and I could see more of the face beneath, pale skin, sunken cheeks, and dark, hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. "Oh, sweetie," I whispered, my heart breaking. "What happened to you? Please let me help." Slowly, the boy raised his arms. The plastic pumpkin slipped from his grasp and clattered to the ground, rolling away into the darkness. As I watched, horrified, he began to lift the sheet from his head. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, my eyes fixed on the small figure before me as the costume fell away. What I saw beneath the sheet would haunt me for the rest of my life. The face that emerged was not that of a living child. The skin was gray and sunken, clinging to sharp cheekbones and a prominent jaw. The eyes were dull and lifeless, set deep in dark sockets. Strands of lank, colorless hair clung to the scalp in patches. I stumbled backward. A scream lodged in my throat. This was impossible. It couldn't be real. And yet, the evidence stood before me, a tangible nightmare on my front porch. The boy, or what was left of him, took a shaky step forward. His movements were jerky and unnatural, like a marionette with tangled strings. When he spoke, his voice was a dry whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Help me," he rasped. "I'm lost." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some elaborate Halloween prank? A hallucination brought on by stress or lack of sleep? Or was I face to face with something truly supernatural? As I grappled with these thoughts, the boy swayed on his feet. He looked so fragile, so alone. Despite my fear, I felt a surge of compassion. Whatever this child was, ghost, zombie, or something else entirely, he was suffering, and he had come to me for help. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to step closer. "It's okay," I said softly, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'll help you. Can you tell me what happened? How did you get lost?" The boy's face crumpled, and to my astonishment, tears began to well up in his lifeless eyes. "I don't remember," he whimpered. "I was trick-or-treating, and then nothing. I've been walking for so long, trying to find my way home. But I can't remember where home is." My heart ached for him. I had 1,000 questions, but they could wait. Right now, this lost soul needed comfort. Slowly, telegraphing my movements, I knelt down and opened my arms. For a moment, the boy hesitated. Then, with a small, broken sound, he stumbled forward into my embrace. He was cold, so cold it almost burned, but I held him tightly, ignoring the chill that seeped into my bones. "It's all right," I murmured, stroking his patchy hair. "You're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." As I held him, I felt a strange, tingling sensation spreading through my body. The world around us seemed to blur and fade, the sounds of the night growing distant. I should have been terrified, but an odd sense of calm washed over me. The boy's form began to shimmer, becoming translucent in my arms. As he faded, I heard his voice one last time, clearer now and filled with relief. "Thank you. I can go home now." In a flash of soft, golden light, he was gone. I found myself kneeling alone on my front porch, arms empty, but still feeling the lingering cold of his embrace. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, but the torn sheet lying on my porch was proof that it had been real. As I finally stood up on shaky legs, I noticed something on the ground where the boy had been standing. Bending down, I picked up a small, old-fashioned candy wrapper. It was faded and brittle with age, but I could just make out the date printed on it. October 31st, 1957. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the full implications of what I had witnessed. This lost soul had been wandering for over 60 years, reliving his last Halloween night over and over again. And somehow, I had been the one to help him find peace. I carefully folded the candy wrapper and placed it in my pocket, a tangible reminder of this extraordinary encounter. As I looked out into the quiet night, I realized that Halloween would never be the same for me again. I had glimpsed a world beyond our own, a realm of lost souls and unfinished business. From that night on, I approached each Halloween with a mixture of anticipation and reverence. I kept my porch light on a little later, my door open a little longer, and if a trick-or-treater came by more than once, looking a little lost or worse for wear, I made sure to greet them with extra kindness. After all, you never know who might be hiding behind a costume or what sort of help they might need to find their way home. The abandoned house party. I should have known better than to throw a Halloween party in an abandoned house. But as I stood in the dark, listening to the terrified screams of my friends echoing through the decrepit halls, I realized it was far too late for regrets. It all started as a stupid dare. My best friend, Jake, and I were walking home from school a week before Halloween, kicking through piles of fallen leaves and discussing our plans for the holiday. "We should do something epic this year," Jake said, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly October air. "I'm sick of the same old parties at someone's parents' house." I nodded, shoving my hands deeper into my jacket pockets. "Yeah, but what? It's not like we have many options in this tiny town." That's when we passed by the old Wilkinson house. It had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. A hulking Victorian mansion with boarded-up windows and a sagging roof. Ivy crept up its weathered walls, and the overgrown yard was a tangle of weeds and brambles. Jake stopped in his tracks, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Dude, what if we had the party there?" I laughed, but the sound died in my throat when I realized he was serious. "Are you crazy? That place is probably crawling with rats, and who knows what else." "Come on, Alex," Jake pleaded. "It's perfect. We'll clean it up a bit, bring some lights and decorations. It'll be the most epic Halloween party this town has ever seen." I hesitated, my gaze drawn to the forbidding silhouette of the house. There was something about it that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't deny the thrill of excitement at the idea. "Fine," I said finally, "but if we get arrested for trespassing, I'm blaming you." The next week was a flurry of secret preparations. We snuck into the house after dark to scope it out, armed with flashlights and dust masks. The interior was in better shape than we expected, musty and cobweb-covered, but structurally sound. We chose the grand living room and adjacent dining room for the party, pushing aside sheets-covered furniture and sweeping up decades of dust. Word spread quickly among our friends, everyone sworn to secrecy. By the time Halloween night rolled around, anticipation was at a fever pitch. I arrived early to set up the final touches. As I lugged boxes of supplies up the creaking front steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a face peering out from one of the darkened upstairs windows. But there was never anything there. Jake showed up an hour later, his car packed with snacks, drinks, and a portable sound system. "This is going to be awesome," he grinned, helping me string up orange lights and fake cobwebs. By 9 p.m., the party was in full swing. About 30 of our classmates had braved the spooky setting, their costumes adding to the surreal atmosphere. Music thumped through the old house, and laughter echoed off the peeling wallpaper. I was in the kitchen, mixing another batch of Witch's Brew punch, when I first noticed something odd. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, my breath visible in the air. I shivered, glancing at the ancient radiator in the corner. Had it given out? As I turned to head back to the party, movement caught my eye. A shadow, quick as a blink, darted across the doorway. My heart raced, but I forced a laugh. Just my imagination, fueled by the creepy surroundings. I rejoined the party, pushing the instant out of my mind as I danced and chatted with my friends. But as the night wore on, more strange occurrences began to pile up. Megan, a girl from my English class, came up to me with a puzzled look on her face. "Hey, Alex, did you guys set up some kind of haunted house thing upstairs? Because I swear I just saw a ghost up there." I frowned. "No, we blocked off the upstairs. It's not safe." Megan's eyes widened. "But I definitely saw something. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, just standing at the end of the hallway. When I blinked, she was gone." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a smile. Must have been a trick of the light. This old place is full of weird shadows. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. I found Jake by the punch bowl and pulled him aside. "Hey, man, I think we should start wrapping this up," I said in a low voice. "Some weird stuff is happening." Jake rolled his eyes. "Don't be such a buzzkill. The party's just getting good." Before I could argue further, a scream cut through the music. We both whirled around to see Lisa, Jake's girlfriend, standing frozen in the doorway to the dining room. "The mirror," she stammered, pointing with a shaking hand. We rushed over, pushing through the crowd of curious onlookers. The massive, tarnished mirror that hung on the dining room wall seemed to ripple, its surface moving like water. And in its depths, I could see faces, dozens of them pale and gaunt, their eyes wide with terror. "What the hell?" Jake whispered beside me. As we watched, transfixed, one of the faces pressed forward, a hand reaching out as if trying to break through the glass. The mirror's surface bulged outward, and hairline cracks began to spiderweb across it. That's when the true panic set in. People started screaming and shoving, everyone scrambling for the exits. I lost sight of Jake in the chaos, swept along by the tide of terrified teenagers. But as we neared the front door, it slammed shut with a boom that shook the entire house. No matter how hard we pulled and pounded, it wouldn't budge. "The windows," someone shouted. But as we turned, we saw that every window was now covered by a solid sheet of what looked like black ice, impenetrable and eerily cold to the touch. We were trapped. The lights began to flicker and die, plunging us into darkness broken only by the feeble glow of a few cell phone screens. The temperature plummeted, our panic breath forming clouds in the air. And then we heard it, a low, mournful moan that seemed to come from the very walls of the house. It grew in volume, joined by other voices, a chorus of agonized wails that made my blood run cold. In the dim light of my phone, I saw shapes beginning to coalesce in the air around us. Translucent figures, their features twisted in eternal anguish, reaching out with grasping hands. "Oh God!" I heard Jake's voice nearby. "What have we done?" The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We hadn't just broken into an abandoned house. We had disturbed something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting for foolish souls like us to awaken it. As the ghostly figures closed in, their touch bringing a bone-deep chill, I grabbed Jake's arm. "We have to find a way out." I shouted over the cacophony of screams, both living and dead. We stumbled through the darkness, dodging grasping spectral hands and the panicked forms of our friends. The house seemed to have come alive around us, floorboards creaking and walls groaning. Doors slammed open and shut of their own accord, and icy drafts whipped through the hallways. We found ourselves at the foot of the grand staircase, the upper floors now alive with floating orbs of pale light and darting shadows. Against my better judgment, we started to climb. "Where are we going?" Jake panted as we reached the second-floor landing. "I don't know," I admitted, "but there has to be a way out somewhere." We moved from room to room, each one revealing new horrors. In one, all the furniture levitated a foot off the floor. In another, the wallpaper peeled away in strips, revealing pulsing, vein-like structures underneath. Finally, we reached what must have been the master bedroom. And there, standing by the window, was a woman in a Victorian-era dress, the same one Megan had described seeing earlier. She turned to face us, and I had to bite back a scream. Her face was a hollow ruin, eyes sunken and skin stretched tight over bone. When she spoke, her voice was like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You should not have come here," she said. "This house has been waiting for so long, and now that you've awakened us, we can never let you leave." Jake and I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind us. The ghost advanced, her form flickering like a faulty hologram. "Please," I begged. "We didn't mean any harm. We'll leave and never come back. I swear." The ghost paused, tilting her head as if considering. "Perhaps there is a way, but it requires a sacrifice." My blood ran cold. "What kind of sacrifice?" Her ruined mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "One of you must choose to stay, willingly, to take our place and allow us to finally rest." Jake and I exchanged horrified glances. The idea was unthinkable, and yet, what choice did we have? Before I could stop him, Jake stepped forward. "I'll do it," he said, his voice shaking but determined. "This was my idea. I'll stay." "Jake, no!" I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off. "It's okay, Alex," he said, giving me a sad smile. "Get everyone out of here. And I'm sorry." The ghost nodded, and suddenly the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I could hear the front door creaking open downstairs, and the sound of my friends rushing out into the night. "Go," Jake said, gently pushing me towards the door. "Please." Tears streaming down my face, I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, gulping in the cool night air. As I looked back at the house, I saw Jake standing at an upstairs window, his form already beginning to fade. He raised a hand in farewell, and then he was gone. The Wilkinson house stands silent once more, its dark windows revealing nothing of the horrors within. But sometimes, on Halloween night, people swear they can hear the faint sounds of a party drifting on the wind and see the flickering of spectral lights behind the boarded-up windows. And I live with the knowledge that my best friend is in there, forever young, forever trapped, all because of one stupid dare on a crisp October afternoon. The haunted hayride mishap. I've always loved the thrill of a good scare, but I never thought I'd find myself living through a real-life horror movie. It was supposed to be a fun Halloween hayride. Instead, it turned into a night that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The sun was setting as my friends and I arrived at Blackwood Farm, casting long shadows across the sprawling cornfields. The air was crisp with the scent of autumn, and a light fog was starting to roll in, adding to the spooky atmosphere. "This is going to be awesome," my best friend Zoe squealed, practically bouncing with excitement as we joined the line for the haunted hayride. I nodded, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I'd always been a bit of a scaredy cat, but I didn't want to ruin the night for everyone else. Besides, it was just a hayride. How bad could it be? After about 20 minutes, it was our turn to board. The wagon was bigger than I expected, with hay bales arranged in rows for seating. About 15 of us clambered aboard, laughing and jostling each other as we found our seats. Our guide, a weathered old man in overalls and a straw hat, climbed up front. "Welcome, folks, to the Blackwood Farm Haunted Hayride," he drawled, his voice gravelly and ominous. "Keep your hands and feet inside the wagon at all times. And remember, not everything you see tonight is part of the show." With a lurch, the tractor started up, and we began our journey into the darkness. At first, it was pretty tame. We rolled past a few simple scenes: a fake graveyard with pop-up zombies, a mad scientist lab with crackling electricity. I started to relax, thinking maybe I had worried for nothing. But as we ventured deeper into the farm, things began to change. The cornfield seemed to press in closer, the stalks rustling ominously in a wind I couldn't feel. The fog thickened, reducing visibility to just a few feet beyond the wagon. Zoe grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Is it just me, or did it get really quiet?" she whispered. She was right. The usual sounds of the farm, distant tractors, animal noises, even the wind, had all faded away. The only sound was the steady rumble of our tractor's engine. Suddenly, the wagon jerked to a stop, nearly throwing us from our seats. The engine sputtered and died. Our guide stood up, frowning. "Folks, we seem to be having some technical difficulties. Sit tight while I take a look." He hopped down and disappeared into the fog. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. I could feel the unease growing among the passengers, nervous laughter giving way to worried murmurs. "He's been gone a while," someone behind me said. "Should we go look for him?" Before anyone could answer, we heard it, a scream, distant but unmistakable, coming from the direction our guide had gone. That's part of the act, right?" Zoe asked, her voice trembling. I wanted to reassure her, but something in my gut told me this wasn't planned. The scream had been too raw, too real. Then we heard another sound, a rustling in the corn, growing louder. Something was moving towards us, fast. "Hey!" a voice called out. "Is anyone there? Help!" A figure burst out of the cornfield. A young woman in torn clothes, her face pale with terror. She scrambled onto the wagon, gasping for breath. "We have to get out of here," she panted. "They're coming." "Who's coming?" I asked, my heart pounding. "What's going on?" She opened her mouth to answer, but her words were drowned out by an inhuman shriek that echoed across the fields. More rustling, more movement in the corn, and this time I caught glimpses of something, shapes that were almost human, but not quite. Too tall, too thin, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. Panic erupted on the wagon. People were screaming, trying to climb down, but the young woman stopped them. "No!" she yelled. "Stay on the wagon. It's our only chance." "Chance for what?" someone demanded. "What the hell is happening?" The woman's eyes were wild with fear. I don't know exactly. I work here at the farm. A few weeks ago, we found something in the cornfield. An old stone altar, I guess you'd call it. Ever since then, things have been wrong. Another shriek, closer this time. I could see them clearly now, emerging from the corn, humanoid figures, their skin a sickly gray-green, with elongated limbs and faces that were nothing but a mass of writhing tentacles. "Oh God!" Zoe whimpered beside me. "This can't be real. This can't be happening." But it was. The creatures were surrounding the wagon, reaching for us with gnarled hands. The air filled with a sickly sweet odor, like rotting fruit. "The tractor," I said suddenly, an idea forming. "Maybe we can start it." I looked at the young woman. "You work here. Do you know how to drive this thing?" She nodded, her eyes lighting up with hope. "Yes, but the keys." I was already moving, scrambling over the side of the wagon. My feet hit the ground and I sprinted for the tractor, my heart in my throat. I could hear the creatures behind me, feel their cold breath on my neck. I reached the tractor and yanked open the door, nearly sobbing with relief when I saw the keys still in the ignition. I turned them, and for one horrible moment, nothing happened. Then the engine roared to life. I threw the tractor into gear just as one of the creatures reached the cab. Its tentacled face pressed against the window, leaving a smear of some foul-smelling slime. I floored it, the sudden movement jerking the wagon forward. There were screams from behind me, but I couldn't look back. I kept my eyes fixed on the path ahead, praying I was going the right way. The tractor plowed through the cornfield, stalks snapping under its wheels. I could hear the creatures pursuing us, their unearthly shrieks mixing with the panicked cries of the passengers. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw lights ahead, the farm, safety. As we burst out of the cornfield, I heard gasps of relief from the wagon, but we weren't safe yet. I could still hear the creatures behind us. I drove straight for the main barn, laying on the horn to alert anyone inside. As we approached, the doors flew open. Farm workers poured out, their eyes widening in shock at the sight of us. "Close the doors!" the young woman from earlier screamed. "Don't let them in." I slammed on the brakes, the wagon skidding to a stop inside the barn. The workers rushed to shut the massive doors, securing them just as the creatures reached us. We could hear them outside, clawing at the wood, shrieking in frustration. For a long moment, no one moved. We all stared at each other in shocked silence, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, one of the farm workers stepped forward. Is everyone okay?" A babble of voices broke out as people started talking all at once, demanding explanations, checking on each other. I sat frozen in the tractor cab, my hands still gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Zoe appeared at my side, gently prying my fingers loose. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved us." I looked at her, then at the crowd of shaken but alive passengers. What were those things? The young woman who had warned us joined us, her face grim. "I don't know, but they're real, and they're out there," as if to emphasize her point. Another shriek echoed from outside, followed by a heavy thud against the barn door. "We need to call the police," someone said. "The army." Someone. But as I looked around at the pale, frightened faces, I knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. We had glimpsed something beyond our understanding, something that shouldn't exist in our world. And as the creatures continued their assault on our shelter, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had been awakened in that cornfield, whatever ancient, eldritch horror we had disturbed, it wasn't going to stop until it had consumed us all. The Blackwood Farm Haunted Hayride was supposed to be a fun Halloween attraction. Instead, it had become a gateway to a nightmare beyond imagination. And as the long night stretched ahead of us, filled with inhuman screams and the splintering of wood, I realized that our real horror was just beginning. The cursed costume. I always thought the phrase, "be careful what you wish for," was just a cliche. But as I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the stranger looking back at me, I realized how terrifyingly true those words could be. It all started 2 weeks before Halloween. I was rifling through the racks at the local thrift store, desperate to find a costume that would finally make me stand out. Year after year, I'd shown up to parties in generic, store-bought outfits, always fading into the background. But this year was going to be different. This year, I was determined to be noticed. That's when I saw it, tucked away in a corner. A vintage flapper dress, all shimmering beads and fringe. It was exactly the kind of unique, eye-catching costume I'd been dreaming of. As I pulled it off the rack, a small card fluttered to the floor. I picked it up, squinting at the faded handwriting. "Warning, wear at your own risk." I snorted, amused by the dramatic message. Probably just some previous owner's idea of a joke. Without hesitation, I took the dress to the counter and bought it. The night of the party, I slipped on the dress, marveling at how perfectly it fit. The beads clinked softly as I moved, catching the light. I applied a deep red lipstick, pinned my hair into finger waves, and stepped back to admire the full effect. The girl in the mirror looked like she'd stepped straight out of the 1920s. For a moment, I could have sworn her eyes flashed a brilliant green, but I blinked, and they were back to my usual brown. Must have been a trick of the light. As soon as I walked into the party, I knew the costume was a hit. Heads turned, conversations paused, and for once, all eyes were on me. I reveled in the attention, floating through the crowd with a newfound confidence. "Great costume, Emma," my friend Lily called out. "Where'd you find it?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words that came out weren't my own. "Oh, this old thing?" I heard myself say in a sultry drawl. "I've had it for ages, darling." Lily's eyebrows shot up, but she laughed it off. "Wow, you're really in character." I nodded, unsure of what had just happened. But as the night wore on, I found myself slipping more and more into the role of a carefree flapper. I danced with abandon, flirted shamelessly, and even found myself sipping champagne. When had I ever liked champagne? It wasn't until I caught my reflection in a window that I realized something was very, very wrong. The girl staring back at me wasn't just in costume. She was someone else entirely. Her features were sharper, her eyes a brilliant emerald green, her smile curved and knowing in a way mine had never been. I stumbled away from the window, suddenly feeling claustrophobic. The beads of the dress seemed to weigh a ton, and the room was spinning. I needed air. I pushed my way out onto the back porch, gulping in the cool night air. What was happening to me? "Having fun, sugar," a voice drawled behind me. I whirled around to find a man leaning against the doorframe. He was dressed in an impeccable 1920s suit, complete with a fedora tilted rakishly over one eye. But there was something off about him. His edges seemed blurred, as if he wasn't quite solid. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. His smile was all teeth. "Don't you recognize me, Evelyn? It's me, Jack. You're Jack." I shook my head, backing away. "My name's not Evelyn. I'm Emma. And I don't know you," he chuckled, the sound sending chills down my spine. "Oh, but you do. Or at least, part of you does. That dress you're wearing, it belonged to Evelyn, my Evelyn. And now, she's waking up inside you. As if on cue, a searing pain shot through my head. Memories that weren't my own flooded my mind. Speakeasies and jazz clubs, stolen kisses and whispered promises. And underlying it all, a deep, gnawing fear. I clutched my head, doubling over. "What's happening to me?" Jack's voice was closer now, right beside my ear. "You're remembering, doll. Remembering the night Evelyn disappeared. The night I killed her." I jerked away from him, horror flooding through me. But even as I recoiled, I felt a part of me, the part that was becoming Evelyn, lean towards him longingly. "You see," Jack continued, his form flickering like a bad television signal, "Evelyn was going to leave me. Said she'd found someone else. I couldn't let that happen, so I made sure she'd be mine forever." The implications of his words sank in and I felt sick. "The dress, it's cursed?" Jack's grin widened. "Smart girl. Evelyn's spirit is bound to it. And now, she's bound to you. Soon, there won't be any Emma left. Just my Evelyn, back where she belongs." I turned and ran, pushing past surprised partygoers as I fled the house. I could hear Jack's laughter echoing behind me, mixing with the sound of jazz music that seemed to be coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, slamming and locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I tried to unzip the dress, but the zipper wouldn't budge. The beads seemed to writhe under my fingers, clinging to my skin. "No, no, no," I muttered, tears streaming down my face. "This can't be happening." But as I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror, I knew it was. My face was changing, features shifting subtly to match the woman in my newfound memories. Evelyn's face. Evelyn's eyes stared back at me, filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. Over the next few days, I barely left my apartment. I called in sick to work, ignored texts from friends, and spent hours researching ways to break curses. But nothing I tried worked. The dress wouldn't come off, and with each passing hour, I could feel more of myself slipping away. Evelyn's memories became clearer, more dominant. I found myself humming songs I'd never heard, craving cigarettes when I'd never smoked, and worst of all, feeling a twisted longing for Jack despite knowing what he'd done. On the third night, I woke to find Jack standing at the foot of my bed. He was more solid now, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Almost there, doll," he said softly. "Just a little longer, and you'll be all mine again." I wanted to scream, to fight, but Evelyn's voice came out instead. "Oh, Jack, I've missed you something awful." He reached out, his hand passing through my cheek like smoke. "I know, baby, but we'll be together soon. Forever this time." As he faded away, I buried my face in my pillow and sobbed. I was losing myself, and I didn't know how to stop it. The next morning, desperate and running out of options, I returned to the thrift store where I'd bought the dress. The elderly woman behind the counter looked up as I entered, her eyes widening in recognition. Not of me, but of the dress. "Oh, you poor dear," she said softly. "I'd hoped we'd seen the last of that cursed thing. Please," I begged, my voice a mixture of my own and Evelyn's. "You have to help me. How do I stop this?" The woman sighed heavily. "There's only one way to break the curse. You have to destroy the dress. But be warned, Evelyn won't go quietly. And Jack. He'll do anything to keep her." She pressed a box of matches into my hand. "Fire is the only thing that will truly end it. But you must be the one to do it. And you must be quick. If the transformation completes before the dress is destroyed, you will be lost forever." I nodded, clutching the matches like a lifeline. As I turned to leave, the woman called out one last warning. "Remember, dear, no matter what you see, no matter what you hear, don't stop until the dress is ash. It's the only way to save yourself." Back in my apartment, I stood in the bathtub, a can of lighter fluid in one hand and the matches in the other. My reflection in the bathroom mirror was almost entirely Evelyn now, only the faintest traces of Emma remaining in my eyes. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," I whispered, "but I can't let you have my life." As I poured the lighter fluid over the dress, I heard Jack's voice, angry and desperate. "Evelyn, don't you dare." I struck a match, watching the small flame dance. Evelyn's memories surged forward. Her love for Jack, her fear, her regret. For a moment, my hand wavered. Then I thought of my own life, my own dreams and hopes. With a deep breath, I dropped the match. The dress went up in flames instantly. Pain seared through me, and I heard Evelyn's scream mixing with my own. Jack appeared, his face contorted in rage, reaching for me with burning hands. But I stood my ground, watching as the dress crumbled to ash. As the last bead melted, I felt a great rushing sensation, as if something was being torn from me. Then silence. I looked down at myself, now clad only in my own clothes, unmarked by fire. In the mirror, my own face, fully my own, stared back at me, eyes wide with disbelief and relief. It was over. I was free. As I swept the ashes of the dress into a garbage bag, I made a silent promise to myself. Next Halloween, I'd stick to store-bought costumes. Being noticed, I'd learned, wasn't always worth the price. And sometimes, the most dangerous monsters are the ones we invite in ourselves. The vanishing trick-or-treaters. I've always loved Halloween, but after what happened last year, I don't think I'll ever look at it the same way again. They say curiosity killed the cat, but in my case, it nearly killed me, and a bunch of innocent kids. It all started with a simple observation, a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. If only I'd left well enough alone. My name's Mike, and I've been part of our neighborhood watch for the past 5 years. It's usually a pretty boring gig, mostly just keeping an eye out for suspicious activity and reporting the occasional act of vandalism. But last Halloween, everything changed. I was on patrol that night, walking the streets of our quiet suburban neighborhood. The air was crisp, leaves crunching under my feet as I made my rounds. Kids in costumes darted from house to house, their laughter and excited shouts filling the air. It was a perfect Halloween night, almost too perfect. That's when I first noticed it. A group of 3 kids, a witch, a zombie, and a superhero, approached the old Wilkinson house at the end of Maple Street. I frowned, pausing in my tracks. The Wilkinson place had been vacant for years, ever since old Mrs. Wilkinson passed away. Her kids had been trying to sell it, but no one wanted to buy a house with such a creepy reputation. I watched as the kids climbed the crumbling front steps and rang the doorbell. To my surprise, the porch light flickered on and the door creaked open. A thin, pale hand emerged, dropping candy into their bags. The kids chorused a thank you and scampered away, already discussing their haul. Curious, I moved closer, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever had answered the door. But by the time I reached the house, the porch light was off again and all was quiet. I shrugged it off, figuring some relative of the Wilkinsons must be staying there, maybe trying to fix the place up for sale. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. More kids approached the Wilkinson house. Each time, the same thing happened. The porch light would flicker on, the door would open just a crack, and a pale hand would distribute candy. But I never saw anyone leave the house, and I never saw the kids who went there join any other groups afterward. By 9 p.m., I'd counted at least 15 kids enter the property, but I hadn't seen a single one come back out. My heart rate picked up as I realized something was very, very wrong. I debated calling the police, but what would I say? That kids were trick-or-treating at a supposedly empty house? That I had a bad feeling? They'd laugh me off the phone. No! If I wanted answers, I'd have to investigate myself. I waited until the next group of kids, 2 little girls dressed as princesses, approached the house. As they reached the front steps, I followed, trying to look casual. "Hey there," I called out, forcing a smile. "Mind if I join you? Just want to make sure everything's safe." The girls looked at me suspiciously, but nodded. As we reached the door, one of them rang the bell. The porch light flickered on, casting long shadows across the overgrown yard. The door creaked open and I tensed, ready for, I don't know what, but instead of a pale hand, a face appeared in the gap. A woman's face, elderly and kind-looking, with twinkling eyes and a warm smile. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice soft and slightly quavering. "What lovely costumes. Here, have some candy, dears." She dropped a handful of brightly wrapped sweets into each of the girls' bags. Then her gaze fell on me and her smile widened. "And you, sir? Aren't you a little old for trick-or-treating?" I felt my face flush. "Oh, no, I'm not. I'm with the Neighborhood Watch. Just making sure everything's okay." "How thoughtful," she replied. "Would you like to come in for a moment? I just made some hot apple cider." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to say no, to grab the girls and run. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left now, I'd never find out what was really going on. "Sure," I heard myself say. "That would be nice." The old woman opened the door wider, ushering us in. The 2 little girls entered without hesitation, but I paused on the threshold, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The interior of the house was not what I expected. Instead of dust and cobwebs, everything was immaculate. The furniture looked like it was straight out of the 1950s, but it all gleamed as if brand new. The air smelled of cinnamon and apples, warm and inviting. "Now, why don't you girls go join the others in the playroom?" the old woman said, gesturing down a hallway. "I'm sure they'd love to see your beautiful costumes." The girls nodded eagerly and scampered off. I watched them go, a knot forming in my stomach. "Others, now then," the woman said, turning to me, "let's get you that cider." She led me into the kitchen, which was just as pristine and old-fashioned as the rest of the house. As she busied herself at the stove, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I thought this house was empty. Are you related to Mrs. Wilkinson?" The woman turned, a steaming mug in her hands. "Oh, I am Mrs. Wilkinson, dear." I felt the blood drain from my face. "But Mrs. Wilkinson died years ago." She smiled, but this time there was something off about it. Something cold that didn't reach her eyes. "Did I?" she said softly. "How interesting." That's when I heard it. A sound coming from somewhere deeper in the house. It started as a low hum, but quickly grew louder. Voices. Dozens of them, maybe more. Children's voices, but they weren't laughing or playing. They were crying, screaming, begging to be let out. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. "What have you done? Where are the children?" Mrs. Wilkinson, or whatever she was, set down the mug with a sigh. "They're here, of course. All of them. Every child who's ever come to my door on Halloween night. They keep me company, you see. It does get so lonely here." I turned to run, but the kitchen door slammed shut. When I looked back, Mrs. Wilkinson's appearance had changed. Her skin was now gray and sagging, her eyes sunken and glowing with an eerie light. "I'm afraid I can't let you leave," she said, her voice now a harsh rasp. "But don't worry. The children will be so excited to have a new playmate." I frantically searched for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My hand closed around a heavy cast iron skillet on the stove. "Stay back," I yelled, brandishing the pan. She laughed, a horrible, grating sound. "Oh, you foolish man. Did you really think you could stop me? I've been doing this for longer than you can imagine." She lunged at me with inhuman speed. I swung the skillet, connecting with her head with a sickening crunch. But instead of falling, she simply stumbled back, her face reforming like clay. I didn't wait to see more. I ran for the nearest window and threw myself through it, feeling glass shatter around me. I hit the ground hard, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet and ran like I'd never run before. Behind me, I could hear Mrs. Wilkinson's enraged howl, and beneath it, the muffled cries of countless children. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station, gasping and bleeding from a dozen cuts. The officers on duty thought I was crazy at first, raving about a dead woman stealing children. But something in my eyes must have convinced them, because within minutes, squad cars were racing toward Maple Street. What happened next is mostly a blur. I remember the house erupting in an otherworldly light as the police approached. The screams, God, the screams. And then silence. When it was over, the house was empty. No Mrs. Wilkinson, no children, just decades of dust and decay, as if the pristine interior I'd seen had never existed. But in the basement, they found something. Hundreds of small objects, each tagged with a name and date, going back nearly a century. A locket, a baseball card, a hair ribbon, mementos, we realized, of every child who had vanished on Halloween night. They never found the children. The official report blamed a gas leak for my hallucinations and the mass disappearance. The house was demolished soon after, but I know what I saw, what I heard, and every Halloween since, I've stood vigil on Maple Street, warning kids away from where the Wilkinson house once stood, because I know the truth, that some hungers never die, and some doors, once open, can never truly be closed. So if you're out trick-or-treating this Halloween, take my advice. If you see a house that looks too perfect, too inviting, just keep walking, because you never know what might be waiting on the other side of that door.